Good morning. When I first met Bill Bidwill, I was a raw 20-year-old kid from Minneapolis, Minnesota, who had just been drafted by the Cardinals. And that raw rookie could have never imagined that he would someday have the distinct honor of paying tribute to the man who gave him the opportunity of a lifetime. 16 years later, it's an extraordinary honor to say a few words about Mr. B on behalf of the thousands of players who have worn a Cardinals uniform during the 8 decades he was associated with the team. Men like Roger Worley, Aeneas Williams, Kurt Warner, Adrian Wilson, and Roy Green, and so many of my teammates and coaches who took the time to be here today. I'd also like to make mention of the toughest Cardinal of them all, Larry Wilson, who wanted to be here today but is unable. He dedicated 40-plus years as a player and as a member of the front office, and I know his heart goes out to the Bidwill family. Those gathered here physically and in spirit speaks volumes about the impact Mr. B had on those of us who've had the privilege to represent him and the Cardinals. I know there are many players over the past few years that didn't have the privilege of getting to know Mr. B, and I regret that. You guys really missed out. Commissioner Goodell spoke a little bit about Mr. B's long history of embracing diversity, but I think it's worthy of repeating. And it's one of the values that had such an impact on so many lives, including mine, because in 2019, it is trendy and fashionable to talk about inclusion and the importance of gender and racial equality. But as evidenced by the signature bow tie that so many of us are wearing here today, Mr. B never had much interest in being trendy or fashionable. Decades ago, when he hired the late Adele Harris and the late Dennis Green, when he hired Bob Wallace and Rod Graves, both of who are here today, he wasn't seeking approval or recognition. It was not common or fashionable. He did it because they were capable and qualified women and men. He did it because it was the right thing to do. Make no mistake about it, I'm sure he took his fair share of criticism, both publicly and privately, for doing what his heart told him was right. But that was the type of man Mr. B was. He lived by his heart, not by the trend of today. He took the same approach to his many charitable works. Like the proud Jesuit he was, he lived by the creed, service to others. And perhaps a higher priority was doing it discreetly. Again, not seeking approval or recognition, but simply because it was the right thing to do. As I look around this beautiful church this morning, I thought about the countless masses Mr. B had attended his entire life. As most of you know, he would go to Mass all the time, but he didn't necessarily want to go for a long time. In fact, if Mr. B had any advice for me this morning, it would be, move it along, Fitz. Show me that clock management. So I'll be mindful of that this morning. By the way, it feels really good to hear a little laughter in the church, because Mr. B loved that too. As we know, he loved to share a funny story, a good joke, and yes, for those that know him, a few bad ones as well. He was telling dad jokes well before we knew what dad jokes were. But what he was serious about was his family and his total love and devotion to them, to his wife, Nancy, of 56 years, and of course, to his 5 children, 10 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. This week, I've had the privilege of seeing so many unbelievable photos of Mr. B throughout the years. As a ball boy in the locker room with the 1947 champions, Chicago Cardinals, as a young man toting the rock at Georgetown Prep, the smile in his face holding that Hallis trophy after we beat the Eagles in the NFC Championship game. But my favorite photos were the ones I saw at the house the ones where he was clearly the most happy and full of joy. They're the ones with his wonderful family. To Bill Jr., to Michael, Nicole, Patrick, and Tim, thank you so much for sharing your father with us. Thank you. And others have pointed out Mr. B's love for history. He loved sharing moments of history, and in particular, ones that were meaningful and intriguing to him. So here's one in his honor. The first game the Cardinals played after Mr. B's dad, Charles, officially purchased the team was in Cincinnati on October 8th, 1933. Exactly 86 years ago today. The Cardinals beat Cincinnati on that day, 3-0. Last Sunday was the first game the Cardinals have played without Mr. B, and we beat Cincinnati. And the margin of victory was that same 3 points. Somebody upstairs may have something to do with that. So yes, games go on, life continues, and history marches forward. But for what Mr. B meant to the National Football League, the Cardinals, this community, and a young 20-year-old kid from Minneapolis, Minnesota will endure forever. Rest in peace, Mr. B.